a cliff. Imagine this like a crime scene, not of violence, but of attention. Every second that passes without engagement is a clue. Every drop in retention is evidence. And your video is the suspect under investigation. Because somewhere inside it, something is pushing people away. Something is making them leave. And unless you learn how to read those signals, you'll keep repeating the same mistakes, wondering why your content isn't working, while others are effortlessly pulling millions of views with what looks like simpler videos. The biggest illusion that traps new creators is the belief that good content automatically wins, that if your idea is strong enough, people will stay. But the reality is brutally different. Attention is not earned through value alone. It is captured through tension, curiosity, and emotional friction. And if your video doesn't create that instantly, the viewer doesn't wait to discover how good it is. They leave before your best part even begins. Now think about the last video you watched till the end, not casually, but fully, without skipping. What kept you there? It wasn't just information, it wasn't just visuals, it was a feeling, a pull, a subtle psychological grip that made you think, I'll just watch a little more, and then a little more. And then suddenly the video was over, and you didn't even realize how much time had passed. That's not luck, that's engineered retention. Behind every high-retention video is a hidden structure, a rhythm that most viewers never consciously notice, but their brain responds to it automatically. Fast cuts when attention dips, slower pacing when emotion builds, strategic pauses to reset focus, and unexpected shifts that break monotony before boredom can even form. Because boredom is the real enemy, not competition, not algorithm, not even quality. Boredom is what kills videos. And here's where things get uncomfortable. Most creators actually create boredom without realizing it. Not because they lack ideas, but because they present those ideas in predictable ways, with flat delivery, repetitive patterns, and no sense of escalation, which makes the viewer feel like they've already seen what's coming next. And the moment predictability enters, curiosity dies. And when curiosity dies, retention follows. The brain is constantly asking one question while watching your video. Is this worth my time right now? And it doesn't ask it once, it asks it again and again, every few seconds, which means your video is not judged as a whole. It's judged moment by moment, microsecond by microsecond, and if you fail even briefly, the viewer doesn't give you a second chance, they move on. This is why the concept of a hook is misunderstood. It's not just your intro, it's a continuous system, a chain of mini hooks that carry the viewer from one moment to the next. Each one designed to create just enough curiosity, just enough tension, just enough emotional engagement to keep them from leaving. Because retention is not about holding attention once, it's about re-earning it repeatedly. But there's a deeper layer that most people ignore. Trust. Because if you manipulate curiosity without delivering payoff, the viewer feels it, even if they can't explain it. And once trust breaks, retention collapses not just for that video, but for your future content as well. Which is why the best creators don't just hook attention, they respect it, they reward it, they justify every second the viewer spends with them. And this is where the real shift happens. When you stop thinking like a creator trying to share content and start thinking like an architect designing an experience, where every second has a purpose, every cut has intention, every word carries weight, and nothing is accidental. Because in the end, audience retention isn't a trick, it's not a hack, it's a skill. One that separates videos people watch from videos people can't stop watching. Now here's where things get even more intense, because if the first 10 seconds decide whether a viewer pauses, the next 20 seconds decide whether they commit, and this is the exact point where most videos silently collapse without the creator even realizing it, because the viewer hasn't left yet. But mentally, they already have one foot out the door, and the only thing keeping them there is a fragile thread of curiosity that can snap at any second if you don't strengthen it with intention. Think of this like opening a mystery. You've shown something intriguing, something incomplete, something that made the viewer stop, but now their brain is demanding clarity. It wants direction. It wants to know, what is this leading to? And if you fail to answer that quickly, The curiosity you created turns into confusion. And confusion is dangerous because, unlike curiosity, confusion doesn't pull people forward, it pushes them away. This is why the first 30 seconds of any high retention video are not about explaining everything, but about establishing a clear path. A promise that tells the viewer exactly what they're about to gain, experience, or discover if they stay. And the most powerful creators do this without sounding obvious, without saying, "In this video, I will." Instead, they embed the promise inside tension, inside storytelling, inside a situation that naturally makes the viewer want to see it unfold. Imagine watching a scene where someone says, "By the end of this, one decision will change everything." You don't know the decision yet, you don't know the outcome, but now you're locked in because your brain wants closure, it wants resolution, it wants to complete the loop that has just been opened, and that open loop is one of the strongest forces in retention psychology. But here's the critical mistake. Most creators open loops and then abandon them. They introduce ideas, questions, or tensions, but never return to them properly, which creates a subtle frustration in the viewer, a feeling that something is missing, and over time, that frustration builds into disinterest, and eventually the viewer clicks away, not because the content was bad, but because it felt incomplete. At this stage of the video, pacing becomes everything, because if you move too slow, the viewer feels like their time is being wasted. But if you move too fast, they feel disconnected, like they're being rushed through something they haven't fully processed. And the balance between these two is what creates flow. That invisible rhythm where the viewer is neither bored nor overwhelmed, but fully immersed. You'll notice that high retention videos often introduce a subtle escalation early on, a sense that things are building towards something bigger, even if the topic itself is simple, because escalation creates momentum, and momentum is what carries the viewer forward without resistance, making the act of watching feel effortless rather than intentional. And then comes a powerful, often overlooked technique, pattern interruption. Because just when the viewer starts to settle into a rhythm, you break it, you shift tone, you introduce a new angle, you change visual energy, or you drop a line that reactivates attention. Because the human brain is wired to notice change, and without change, attention fades. But this interruption has to feel natural, not forced, because if it feels random, it breaks immersion instead of enhancing it. And that's the difference between amateur editing and intentional storytelling. One disrupts the experience, the other deepens it. Another layer at this point is emotional alignment. Because if the viewer doesn't feel connected, whether it's curiosity, tension, excitement, or even mild anxiety, they won't stay. And this is why purely informational content often struggles with retention unless it is wrapped in narrative, because facts inform, but emotions hold attention. And as you move toward the end of this early phase, something subtle but crucial happens. The viewer makes a quiet internal decision. I'm staying. And once that decision is made, your job shifts from capturing attention to maintaining investment, which is a completely different game because now it's not about convincing them to stay. It's about making sure they never regret staying. So the first 30 seconds aren't just an introduction, they are a psychological contract between you and the viewer, a moment where expectations are set, trust begins to form, and the foundation of retention is either built strong enough to carry the rest of the video or weak enough to collapse before it even truly begins. And this is the point where most videos quietly start to bleed out. Not with a dramatic drop, not with an obvious failure, but with a slow, almost invisible decline that creeps into your retention graph somewhere in the middle. A place where the energy dips, the structure loosens, and the viewer, who once felt curious, engaged, even slightly invested, begins to drift. Not because they made a conscious decision to leave, but because nothing is actively convincing them to stay. This middle section is the most dangerous zone in your entire video, because it's where the initial curiosity has already been spent, the novelty has faded, and the ending hasn't arrived yet, which means you're now operating in a psychological gap where the viewer needs a reason to continue, not just a promise. And if you fail to provide that reason, attention starts slipping through your fingers second by second. Think about it like a conversation that starts strong but slowly loses direction. where at first you're fully present, listening, reacting, interested, but then the energy flattens, the points become predictable, and without even realizing it, your mind starts wandering. And eventually, you disengage, and that exact same thing happens inside your video when the middle lacks progression. The biggest mistake creators make here is assuming that once they've hooked the viewer, the rest of the video will carry itself. But retention doesn't work like that, because attention is not a one-time win. It's a continuous negotiation, and in the middle of your video, that negotiation becomes harder. Because now the viewer is subconsciously asking, is this still going somewhere, or have I already seen the best part? This is why progression is everything. Not just movement, but meaningful progression, where each moment feels like it's building toward something, revealing something new, or deepening the viewer's understanding in a way that makes leaving feel like missing out. Because the fear of missing out, when used correctly, is one of the strongest retention drivers you have. High retention creators don't treat the middle as filler, they treat it as escalation, where stakes rise, insights sharpen, and the narrative tightens, creating a sense that the video is not plateauing, but accelerating, even if the topic itself is simple, because it's not about what you're saying, it's about how it evolves. And here's where structure becomes your hidden weapon, because instead of presenting information in a flat sequence, top creators layer it, they introduce a point, then challenge it, then expand it, then twist it, creating a dynamic flow that keeps the brain engaged, because the brain is not just consuming, it's processing, predicting, and reacting. And when that cycle is active, attention stays alive. Another critical element in this phase is re-engagement, because no matter how good your video is, attention will naturally dip at certain moments. And instead of ignoring that, skilled creators anticipate it, placing intentional spikes, whether it's a surprising statement, a shift in tone, a bold claim, or a moment of contrast that acts like a reset button for the viewer's focus. But these spikes only work if they are placed with awareness, because random intensity feels chaotic, while strategic intensity feels compelling, and the difference lies in timing, knowing exactly when the viewer is about to drift, and pulling them back in before they fully disconnect. At the same time, clarity becomes even more important, because as your ideas deepen, the risk of losing the viewer increases. And if they ever feel confused or overwhelmed, they won't struggle to understand. They'll simply leave, which is why the best creators simplify without dumbing down, guiding the viewer through complexity without making them feel lost. And then there's something even more subtle: momentum. Because once a viewer feels like they are in the flow of your video, where everything is moving with purpose and direction, they stop questioning whether to stay and start experiencing the content without resistance. And that's the point where retention becomes natural instead of forced. So the middle of your video isn't just a bridge between the beginning and the end. It's a battlefield, where attention is either strengthened or slowly lost, where the viewer either becomes more invested or quietly disconnects. And if you can master this section, if you can turn it from a weak point into a driving force, then you're no longer just holding attention. You're controlling it. And now we step into the layer most creators never fully see: the invisible machinery behind attention. The psychological triggers that don't just hold viewers, but quietly lock them in. The subtle forces that operate beneath logic, beneath conscious thought, influencing decisions before the viewer even realizes they've made them. Because at this level, retention is no longer about editing or scripting alone. It's about understanding how the human brain reacts to uncertainty, reward, tension, and release. The first and most powerful trigger is what psychologists call open loops. Moments where something is started but not finished, a question is raised but not answered, a situation is introduced but not resolved, and the brain, almost instinctively, begins to seek closure, because humans are wired to complete patterns, to resolve tension, to find answers, and when you leave something open, you create a mental itch that can only be satisfied by continuing to watch. But open loops are dangerous if used carelessly, because if you stack too many without resolving them, the viewer doesn't feel curiosity anymore. They feel fatigue, a sense that nothing is being completed, nothing is being delivered, and that's where trust begins to break, which is why the best creators don't just open loops, they close them at the right time, creating a rhythm of tension and payoff that keeps the viewer emotionally invested. Then comes another trigger that operates almost silently: anticipation, the feeling that something is coming, something important, something worth waiting for. And this is often built not through explicit statements, but through tone, pacing, and subtle hints that signal to the viewer that staying will lead to something meaningful, something they don't want to miss. This is why phrases like, "and what happened next changed everything," work so effectively. Not because of the words themselves, but because of the expectation they create, the forward pull they generate. And when used correctly, anticipation turns passive viewers into active participants, mentally leaning forward, waiting for the moment to arrive. But anticipation alone is not enough. You need variation. Because the brain adapts quickly, and what felt engaging a minute ago can feel repetitive the next. Which is why high retention videos constantly shift their energy, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically, but always with purpose, ensuring that the experience never feels static. Another critical trigger is emotional contrast, the shift between different emotional states: tension to relief, curiosity to revelation, seriousness to lightness. Because contrast amplifies impact, it makes moments feel stronger, sharper, more memorable. And without it, everything blends into a single flat experience that the brain quickly loses interest in. And then there's micro rewards, small moments of satisfaction scattered throughout the video, insights, realizations, or even simple confirmations that give the viewer a sense of progress, a feeling that their time is being rewarded continuously, not just at the end. Because if the only payoff comes at the conclusion, many viewers will never reach it. At the same time, there's a trigger that works in the background: cognitive ease. The idea that the easier something is to process, the more likely we are to continue engaging with it, which is why clarity, pacing, and structure matter so much. Because if your video feels mentally heavy or difficult to follow, the brain naturally resists it. But perhaps the most overlooked trigger is identity alignment. The subtle feeling that this video is for me, that what is being said connects to the viewer's own thoughts, experiences, or ambitions. And when that connection is made, even briefly, the viewer becomes more invested, because now they're not just watching content, they're seeing themselves inside it. And when all these triggers work together, open loops creating curiosity, anticipation pulling forward, variation preventing boredom, contrast amplifying emotion, micro rewards sustaining engagement, clarity reducing resistance, and identity building connection, you don't just have a video that people watch, you have an experience that people stay with, often without even understanding why. So audience retention at this level isn't about tricks or shortcuts. It's about orchestrating human psychology in a way that feels natural, seamless, almost invisible. Because the most powerful retention strategies are the ones the viewer never notices. The ones that guide their attention without forcing it, leading them from one moment to the next, until suddenly the video is over and they're still there. And this is where everything shifts from theory to execution. Because no matter how powerful your idea is, no matter how strong your hook or your psychological triggers are, if your editing and pacing fail, the entire structure collapses silently, brutally, and often without you even realizing why. Because the truth is, viewers don't experience your video as a script. They experience it as a flow of moments, and editing is what controls that flow. Think about this for a second. The viewer doesn't care how much effort you put into filming, how long you spent writing, or how valuable your content is. They only feel what's happening right now on their screen. And if that moment feels slow, unclear, repetitive, or unnecessary, their brain immediately starts pulling away because attention is always reacting to the present, not the intention behind it. The biggest mistake most creators make is confusing information with momentum. They think adding more content makes a video better, but in reality, every extra second that doesn't push the experience forward is friction, and friction kills retention, which is why the best editors are ruthless. They cut anything that doesn't serve the flow, even if it took hours to create. Now here's the key insight. Pacing is not about speed, it's about rhythm, because a video that is constantly fast becomes exhausting, And a video that is constantly slow becomes boring, but a video that breathes, that alternates